I was getting interested in calligraphy because my Irish father, called Patrick, gave me a broad edge fountain pen, an Osmiroid, when I was about 9. And then this was made when I was about 16 or 17. And I was completely self taught. I had almost no books. And my father sent me Writing, Illuminating, and Lettering by Edward Johnston when I was maybe 11, 12. So I've been mucking around with a broad edge pen, basically, with almost no direction. And I wrote this assignment while I was in school as an art history assignment in 1984. I'm showing you all the shame that I have at the moment. I hope you'll enjoy it. I hope like I've done everything wrong in this assignment. Like this is probably the worst book cover that I have ever laid eyes on, and it's all my doing. I was very lucky to go to Roehampton Institute and be taught by this woman, Anne Camp. I had other teachers, including Gena Goff, Tom Perkins, Jen Lindsay, but Anne was the most influential teacher to me because it's just one of those things where you feel seen by someone, and I have very fond memories of her. This is taken after I finished my studies in Roehampton in 1809, and I visited her a few years after. She sadly passed away in 2019, having lived a very full life, I'm glad to say. And this is her book on the side, Pen Lettering. Now, a side thought is this. I'm putting this in to show the relevance of these letters to something we do today. And this is the very famous Renaissance. Maybe someone had problems with putting him in the Renaissance, but Dante is certainly part of Renaissance thinking because he wrote a book about the use of the spoken vernacular language. And in Norwegian, om diktning på folkespråket. In Latin, let's see if I don't speak Latin at all. The Vulgari Eloquentia. So there's the first printed edition in Latin that I know of. I can't remember the date. Probably it's quite late, 1523 or something. Now this is a Norwegian edition that I was lucky enough to be asked to set in type to do the book design on, and this is the type. This is the title page of the book. It's been translated and commentated upon by Espen Grønli. And I was lucky enough to be able to use Briozo Pro, which is a typeface designed by Robert Slimbach, modeled on his own Renaissance minuscule interpretation for the broad edge pen. And also Dante by Giovanni Mardersteig, and they're both modeled on letters from the Italian Renaissance, actually. Okay. Now, a blackboard demonstration. Now, I did this at a time when I was teaching in a school for graphic design in Norway, and I was surprised to have a student saying, "Which font did you just write?" As if the whole demonstration wasn't there to show that Antiqua letters come out of the broad edge pen. In this case, a chalk held at an angle, giving you the same result as a broad edge pen. Now, for those of you who are quite new to calligraphy or don't know that much about Edward Johnston, I needed to put this in. The godfather of modern calligraphy, Edward Johnston, and he wrote his book Writing, Illuminating, and Lettering in 1923. We'll get back to that, I think, 1923 or soon. It shows you how persistent Johnston was in focusing on the basics in the Latin tradition or Western tradition of calligraphy, using a broad edge pen. So yeah, and this is a photo of him at work, and a friend of his came by with their daughter. I think it was Sydney Cockerell, I'm not sure, and she exclaimed, "He looks like some strange bird." This shows a scribe with quill in hand writing a manuscript, and Johnston kind of rediscovered this broad-edged pen and put it into our Western or Latin culture of letters, again by publishing this book. And it had a tremendous impact not only on calligraphers but also on type designers and graphic designers. And this is a part of our modern graphic design history. Obviously, you know the sign on the right. It is from the London Underground, and they're still in use. And this is a picture of his original paste up of the letters. And beneath that is some of the other typefaces published around the same time that were influenced by Edward Johnston's discoveries. So in my book, I'm quite focused on re-establishing this connection between the written and the printed letters, and I think it's more important now than I guess in a long time to do so, because we're surrounded with computers, and some students even think that the computers are producing the letters, or indeed that they are the result of pure geometry and that you don't need the human hand or the human eye or the history of evolution of letters to make fonts, which of course you don't, not in a technical sense, but in a cultural sense, you obviously do. Now, some of the findings of Edward Johnston are what he calls family likeness or unity in a alphabet, so that they can function in different contexts. When writing different texts, you get obviously different combinations of the letters of the alphabet in a given text. So the letters need a family likeness so that you're given a comprehensive and legible whole. But also, the question of beauty enters the picture at some point. So this just from my book shows you different shapes. It's a wonderful example of a Carolingian minuscule, and whether it has been written by the English scribe Alcuin from York or not is not certain, but it's from the same time, so I think theoretically he might have written it. Probably written at Tours in France. These letters are really small, and this is blown up, so the letters aren't made for us to look at like hundreds of years after. But these letters are important, the Carolingian minuscules, because they form the basis of what they, in the Renaissance, copy and that eventually transform into Italic and what we today call Antiqua or Old Style Antiqua letters. This is a late Carolingian minuscule, and this is the original manuscript from which Edward Johnston deduced his foundational hand, a basic hand that he meant would be a good starting point for beginners. In this particular minuscule alphabet, O and N shapes are really helpful to ponder and to meditate upon. So this is that manuscript. It's a late Carolingian minuscule, and then we're moving in the history of letters towards what I showed you in this slide, a compression of the letters into more Gothic shapes, and this is written by. For once, we actually have a scribe, ladies and gentlemen, Edwin, the scribe, between 1150 and 1160. South of England, and this is a written proto-Gothic script. Now, the letters look a little bit more Gothic. Just look at the chunky serifs. I'll get back to the serifs, but look at these. It's not quite true that the minuscules didn't have serifs before the Renaissance, because you do find them, and this is not the only manuscript in which you find them. Yeah, so, and this is the first printed type in Italy. And it's printed by Schwenham and Panarts in a monastery, Subiaco, outside of Rome in 1467, Benedictine monastery, and very much broad-edged pen shape. They take their shape from written calligraphy, because that was what they were looking at the time. What else should they be looking at? Well, Roman inscriptions, but we shall get there. So this is a Proto-Gothic printed type, 1467, and then I've been looking into, this is a page from my book, but there are actually a few commissions in here. So, and exploring modern uses of the same Proto-Gothic. And this is one of my favorite examples of any historical manuscript. I'll zoom in, because it's as if it was made for me to talk about and to show students this connection between, I would say, this lost connection now between the written by the human hand with a pen a broad-edged pen, paper or vellum. In this case, this is a printed piece on vellum with a handmade initial in the style that they made handmade initials in handmade manuscripts at the time. And then this, a wonderful broad-edged pen piece of calligraphy, kind of a foundational hand, just next to the printed letter, which we'll get to, which is Nicholas Jensson, as we shall see. In about 90% of the times we open a novel to read it, it's been printed in a Litera Antiqua type based on these letters from that time. Now, this is one of my favorites during the Renaissance, and it's Bartolomeo Sanvito from Padua in Italy. Just wonderful life to these, and he was one of the few calligraphers at the time who was actually managing to write a decent Roman capital with a broad-edged pen. These capitals. We'll get back to the capitals. Now, what I find interesting is what they were up to during the Renaissance when they went on excursions. Look at these guys. Yeah, they all dressed up as little demons and broke off old antique sculptures. Okay, so joke aside, here's a minuscule alphabet, or a minuscule type letter. Now, this is the serif that we're going to look closer at, because this is actually a broad-edged pen shape, but with serifs, the same type of serifs that he puts on his majuscule letters. Look at the T. Yeah. And the A, look at this. The same type of serifs he puts on the minuscules. And it's an excellent example of just how close calligraphy and typography was during the Renaissance. And also how much they were looking at older things, older examples of things. And this is another example of Bartolomeo Sanvito's is a manual of Paggio Cathedral. I don't have the actual date for this. It's probably late 1400s. This is very similar to what the printed letters looked like. And I just couldn't help myself just to show you the connection that Robert Slimbach in 2004, he published a wonderful typeface based on Renaissance calligraphy, his own interpretation of it, and studies with a broad edge pen. I made them lean forwards. I made them cursive using InDesign. So the actual, because I wanted to put this next to Bartolomeo Sanvito's minuscules, just to show you truly how strikingly strong the familiarity is between the Antiqua and the written letter. And also, this is something that they took from the manuscript tradition, is the punctuation and the system of punctuation. So there's a colon and there's a semicolon, and they obviously didn't just appear when Aldus Manutius started printing books, or Nicholas Jensson did. They came from the manuscript tradition, but they were formalized by the in the Renaissance by the typographers and book publishers of the time. This is a Cicero or Cicero by Nicholas Jensson, 1470, and here you can see the you not only see the wonderful imprint in the handmade mold-made paper, but you also see their chunky serifs. And this is probably the most famous book publisher in the Renaissance. He's been known for sort of creating the first pocket book, or the paperback book. Now, he printed, it is true that he printed small volumes that were affordable, much more affordable for the regular student than having a handmade manuscript produced. But he didn't make letters himself, Aldus Manutius, and I think it's extraordinary how little known that Francesco Griffo is, because he was his type designer and he made the actual font for Aldus Manutius. They actually had a copyright issue between the two of them, so Francesco broke with Aldous at one point and started working with other people because Aldous was trying to take credit for his type. And this is the Italian writing master Ludovico degli Arrighi in 1520. It's a late version, obviously, of the Littera Antica handwritten. So this has been made after the art of printing with the Littera Antica. And I'm not sure how much Arrighi is actually copying a printed book or something written at this stage. Very flat pen angle. The curve here is pretty, not to say weak, it doesn't have much weight. So the pen angle here is about 10 degrees for those of you who are interested in pen angles. I find it really interesting to look at arch forms in different typefaces, compare the end shapes. This is one by Jovica Veljovic, a typeface based on the Carolingian minuscule around 800 AD. And this is also by Slimbach that I just showed you. It has a bold version. These are two older than Brioso typefaces based on Renaissance models, the famous Bembo and then the Centaur by Bruce Rogers. Both were made in the, I think, 30s. They were modeled on Aulus Manutius's and Griffo's letters. Adaug Armand is a later edition based on the 1560 types of Adaug Armand. This is Minion, also a Renaissance typeface by Slimbach, a modern one. Adobe Caslon is a modern interpretation of William Caslon's typeface in England, 1680 something. Times New Roman. I'm sorry, people. I can't stand Times New Roman. I think it's we all choose our opponents. There's a neoclassical typeface called Dado. Now you can see how the art shape changes in these letters, which is something that I'm interested in showing you. Right, this is my own version. Just recently. Trying to write Renaissance Littera Antica letters, putting them back into the pen and trying as at my best to put life into them again. If you don't know where the majuscules came from, this is just a small recap. They did come from the Phoenicians to the Greek, and then the Romans copied the Greek letters, added some of their own, and took some of the Greek letters out. And in my book, I have an example of this, and I've been fortunate to work with Sunderstone, who's a type designer, and he's made these Numa by Sunderstone in 2000, and they're based on early Etruscan and Latin alphabets. I think it's fascinating that he's actually digitized these, so you can write early Etruscan and Latin on your keyboard. And some of them look kind of nice, quirky, modern to my eye. This is an early inscription of the epitaph of Lucius Cornelius Scipio from about 260 BC, showing you that already the basic skeleton shapes of our letters have come into being. And this is also from my book, showing you a Capitals Rustica and a graffiti piece. This, unfortunately, it was bombed during the Second World War, so there's nothing left of it but photographs. And you can see brush-made Roman capitals made straight onto the wall. And this is a really nice detail of an inscription in Rome. Capitalis Quadrata. A pen made later, this is 4th century. There are very few examples of this, and obviously I think because it takes a hell of a lot of time to write it. Yeah, and these are some modern typefaces based on older Roman inscriptions. So the fact that they, in the Renaissance, went back to their sources and looked at classical Roman inscriptions, it's repeated today because most of these have been made in the 80s and 90s, 1980s and 90s, by modern type designers who digitized them. The most famous being Trajan, which has been used in so many movies that some people call it Trajan the movie font. And many people in the Renaissance and the Baroque came up with the answer geometry. They tried to come up with different grid solutions as to how the letters are made, but the letters look really dead compared to the actual Roman inscriptions. If you look at this R, it has a really strange way of swelling around the stroke. What I would say is that both Romain du Roi, the King's Letter in France, 1694, Champfleury by Geoffroy Tory, and these other examples are kind of lifeless. They didn't quite get how the Romans made their letters. The man who actually cracked it is called Father Edward M. Cottish. And these are brush strokes made previous to having made an inscription out of this R. So this is brush. You can see the actual brush stroke and the way that the brush has been turned. Now, what's the relationship then between the basic minuscule shape and the majuscule shapes or the capitals? This is it. A basic geometrical scheme explaining the difference of width between an O and an H in orange in the capitals, and also the difference between wide letters and half width letters like the E, R, S, L, F, and the S and the B. Now, the same basic geometrical scheme can be used for minuscules, showing you the relationship between the minuscule shapes. Extraordinary. Something Edward Johnston didn't know when he went into the British Museum to study the Harley manuscript, which has that very same basic underlying geometry for minuscules. Anyways, Il Perfetto Scrittore from 1569, and just a wonderful book. Now, this is the other dude from the Renaissance who kind of cracked the code. He did go in situ, on the spot, and look at inscriptions and study them, and he drew them freehand. And 1569. So you can see the best studies are based and rooted in geometry, but they depart from it when the human hand starts doing its thing. Again, returning to Bartolomeo San Vito, this is 1480. I did actually just do a workshop on Roman capitals online, and I made, this is not in my book, so I just made a new one. A new San Vito capitals model, because I find them fascinating. So they have these chunky sort of serifs that are put on with a broad edge pen. There's a diagram at the bottom, and also a moderate rustic capital from the Roman times, kind of related, kind of serif built up. So I'm calling these a distant relative of the Capitals Rustica, basically. How did these Antiqua letters have their serifs? This is just a page from my notebook, and this is the kind of key to understand how the Renaissance letters came about, and why, indeed, these letters, traced by Nicholas Jensen and Aldus Manutius, look at the way that the serifs look. They're not based on geometry at all. They're based on the broad edge pen. It's from a workshop in Brighton that shows you the diagram of the movement towards italic letter. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the writing masters and italic. And basically, I've always thought of the italic as a kind of compressed Carolingian shape, as you can see here. So the Carolingian, and then leaning forwards and becoming more compressed. But Ewan Clayton, in his book The Golden Thread, which I will recommend to anyone reading about the history of letters, he pointed out that a lot of the italic at the time was also influenced by Gothic cursive, right? And some A shapes. These are older A shapes that you see popping up again in typography. Like you all know this letter from type. And then the more italic looking shapes underneath. And this is an interesting manuscript that I don't have many. I have the name of it and an approximate date, but I don't have more information. Tacitus Annales and Historia pre 1467. It's just a wonderful example of how they would make notes in the margins of manuscripts while copying them or before handing them over to someone else. Or maybe just while thinking out loud and remember to look this up in this other book type of thing. And then a formalized forward-leaning cursive letter here. This is an original calligraphy by Arrighi. There aren't many examples of it around, and we don't have the original La Operina, the writing manual that he made. So I'll just do that because this. So this is Ludovico degli Arrighi's Operina, the original. So we have the printed Operina, but we don't have the original. So how did the letters come about, and what would they look like in a more modern version? Right, so I asked myself that, and I took up a pen and I started copying them 1-to-1 size. So this is my interpretation of Arrighi's La Operina, trying to put the woodcut letters that you see on the left into the pen. He's pretty crazy, Arrighi. Like I've copied the whole Operina, 33 pages. He's pretty crazy. Look at this wild stuff stretching into space on this side. So I almost got to know him. And this is Cresci, the guy who drew the Roman majuscules in the Renaissance that I showed you. His writing an original. And look at these club-shaped type of tops of letters. And this is what eventually turned into our copperplate writing, our looped writing. I just love the writing masters in the Renaissance. They're pretty. Like, look at Mercato. This is quite late, 1540. Just crazy the way that these serifs play with one another. Just a wonderful dance that they're creating. Yeah, and Bernardino Cataneo, another favorite of mine. Less crazy on this, right? The N. But look at his B and his C. Yeah. So Spanish and maybe national temperament or something came into the picture here. More ornate. Maybe it's influenced by Moorish culture. Who knows? Look at this. This is a wonderful type of ampersand. Look at this, the way it stretches up. Like a plant almost growing. So just a collection of ampersands from Catherine Atkins's book, The Masters of the Italic Letter here. And just to show you the width and scope of some of the variations that you can find among the Renaissance writing masters at the time, playing around with the ET ligature, which is the ampersand. This Moro going crazy with this, like flourish, rich in diversity. Now, whilst most will probably look at illuminated letters and flourishes, I always tend to look at basic shapes. I'm thinking that basic shapes, if you don't have a good basic shape, then all the flourishes and distractions that you put around it are sort of wasted. I just find it really nice to look at and learn from good basic shapes. Yeah. And before putting any serifs on, before putting the leaf gold on, before color, before anything, good basic shapes. My best advice to anyone doing calligraphy. This is another favorite of mine, Francisco Lucas. 3 different types of italic from Lucas. A pointed, a semi-pointed, and a rounded formata. Right, now, as far as handwriting is concerned, I would recommend this page at the bottom, a resource page for handwriting, www.bream.net. Just wonderful. You can download this. You can download the whole Lauperina. You can download practice sheets for students, wonderful helps and tips, all on that web page. It's a really good resource page for those interested in handwriting. And his model is based on the Renaissance writing masters, including Arrighi. I do have a chapter in my book on handwriting. These are some of the exercises from that. And there's a list of inscriptions from the 1400s on the left, which is a good model if you want to copy something that's almost monolinear to improve your handwriting. And yeah, just mentioning the German saying from von Larisch that Schrift kommt von Schreiben. Letters come from writing them. They don't come from the computer. They don't come from geometry per se. They come from us writing them, putting life back into them.